Hello ladies and gents, welcome back, welcome to video 2 of #Bannockburn month. Now if you missed the previous video, do please go back and watch that before watching this one. I'll try to remember and put a link to the video in the description below. In that video we looked at the risk that Edward II was taking by coming north into Scotland and campaigning in the summer of 1314. And in this video we are going to have a look at what has changed in Scotland, why Edward might feel a little bit more confident, why he might feel like this is a risk worth taking. And put very simply, the reason why it may seem like a good idea for Edward, why Edward might be willing to make this gamble in 1314, is that in early 1314 it may be that King Robert the Bruce, the King of Scots at the time, Edward's rival, Bruce may be quite sick in early 1314. In fact, he may very well be at death's door. Now we know that Bruce had been very ill back in 1308, and we know that the way Bruce is described in 1308 when he's really sick is kind of the same way he's described when he is definitely dying around 1328, 1329. He's described on both occasions as being very weak, unable to walk, having to be carried around in a litter. And in 1308, as in 1328, 1329, his contemporaries, both Scots and English, are worried that the king is not going to make it through. In 1308, when the king becomes sick, the Scots withdraw into Sleach, a kind of somewhat mountainous area up in the northeast, over the Christmas period, and the English redouble their efforts, or the English allies in Scotland, particularly led by John Comyn, the Earl of Buchan, redouble their efforts to try and get in at the Scots during this period, hoping that the king's illness, the king's weakness, is going to make the Scots vulnerable to finally being overwhelmed and defeated. Now the fact that Bruce is described in similar ways in 1308 as he is in 1328, 1329 may suggest, and I would say does suggest, that whatever kills Bruce, and I'm sure we'll talk in other videos further down the line about what actually it is that kills King Robert in 1329, but whatever that illness is, it's something that is recurring. It's something that flares up every so often, and that Bruce, at periodic moments throughout his reign, he has outbursts of this illness, to the worry and concern of his allies and supporters, and to the joy, it seems, of his many opponents. And maybe it's been suggested quite convincingly, I would say, that early 1314, possibly late 1313 through to early 1314, is another instance of the king suffering from whatever ailment this is, another flare-up of this disease, this disorder, whatever it may be. Now the reason for that, the reason for suggesting that, is that Bruce is quite active in 1313, right up until the summer. In the summer of 1313, the Scots actually managed to capture the Isle of Man. This is quite a get for the Scots, and the Isle of Man provides them with a base from which they can do all sorts of things that might upset the English. From the Isle of Man, they can potentially raid into English controlled areas of Ireland, into the northwest of England by sea, even perhaps down as far as Wales. So this is a big get, and Bruce is there for the moment when Castle Rushen, the main fortification on the Isle of Man, surrenders. This is in June 1313. And he does seem to hold a parliament or a general council. There's some kind of assembly in October 1313 up at Dundee. We don't have particularly extensive records for this assembly, and we have to put together its existence from kind of other references and so forth to it in other sources. Bruce is certainly producing some charters up there in October 1313, and for the first time he is styling his brother and heir, Edward Bruce, as the Earl of Carrick. Now, that is quite interesting, because up until this point the Earldom of Carrick has remained with the Crown. But from October 1313 it is Edward Bruce, the King's brother and heir, his senior male relative, who is now using the title Earl of Carrick. So it's possible that this Parliament, this General Assembly, whatever it is, General Council, has one of the main orders of business there has been concerned with this issue of succession. Who should take over as King of Scots in the event that Bruce should die without a male heir of his own, without a son of his own. Now, that's the sort of thing that parliaments do concern themselves with quite often. That's naturally enough something that is of a great deal of importance to medieval monarchs who takes over should they die. It's something of importance to medieval political communities as a whole, and for the Scots, of course, they have seen, following the death of Alexander III, the dangers that are inherent when there is any uncertainty over the question of succession. So it's possible that this is just the Scots, the Bruce Scots, of course, innocently trying to figure out where, to clarify, that is, where the line of succession runs, and it may just be Bruce finally now that he has a little bit of space, a little bit of time, now that the momentum in the war is shifting in his favour, finally just clarifying things, just making it clear that yes, his younger brother, his senior male relative, Edward Bruce, is the man who should inherit in the event that Bruce dies. Of course, it may also be the case that for the second time in his reign, Bruce is starting to come down with whatever this mystery illness is, and both he and his supporters are getting worried in October 1313 that the king might be on his last legs, and so they are trying to make sure that before anything happens to the king, he is recognizing and acknowledging who the next in line should be. Edward Bruce, of course. Now that is somewhat speculative. That could go, that could be interpreted in many ways, I suppose, or at least in those two ways that I set out. However, there's more to this suggestion that Bruce is ill than just that mystery assembly at Dundee in October 1313, because after Edward has announced, after it has become clear that Edward is planning to come north into Scotland in 1314, the Bruce Scots are very active, very busy in the early months of 1314, from the end of winter through into the spring of 1314. Basically, it looks like what the Scots are trying to do is, before Edward gets into Scotland, presumably they know that Edward's on his way, but before this English army can come north, the Scots are trying to dismantle as much of what remains of the English administration in southeast Scotland, where English power remains reasonably strong. The Scots are trying to dismantle that, as much of it as possible, before Edward can come north, just to make things that little bit more tricky, that little bit more difficult and dangerous for Edward when he comes north in the summer. However, amidst all of this activity, King Robert is nowhere to be seen. King Robert normally is right at the heart of things. King Robert is a very busy, very active king, but not in these crisis months of early 1314, when the Scots manage to capture Roxburgh Castle in February 1314. They are not led by their king, Robert. They are led by James Douglas. Not even Sir James Douglas yet. He's still but of little might, as Barber puts it. He is just an ambitious local thug, an up-and-coming warlord, and seemingly as a piece of private enterprise, he manages to capture Roxburgh Castle, sneaks in during the night, and overwhelms the garrison. Now, as I say, this seems to be a piece of private enterprise on Douglas's part. That's perhaps not that unusual. Douglas is kind of kept on a long leash at this point. He's not really part of the sort of core royal administration at this point. As I say, it's quite early in his career, relatively speaking. But when a royal force is dispatched to go and demolish Roxburgh Castle, to slight it, again, it is not Robert Bruce who is at the head of this army. It's Edward Bruce, the newly made Earl of Carrick, the man who, remember, might be taking over the whole royal administration in the event of his brother's death. Similarly, at the mid-March, when the Bruce Scots managed to capture Edinburgh Castle again by ruse, it's not King Robert who is there laying siege to Edinburgh Castle. It is his dearest nephew, his closest and most richly rewarded kinsman, Thomas Randolph, Earl of Murray, who takes Edinburgh Castle, who leads the Bruce Scots to victory there at Edinburgh in March 1314. And shortly afterwards, when the Scots lay siege to Stirling Castle, the exact chronology is a little bit difficult to put together. It may be that Edinburgh and Stirling are placed under siege at the same sort of time. That's certainly the impression that's given by Barber. But it's my video, and I'm going to suggest that it probably makes more sense to see Edinburgh placed under siege first, and then the Scots moving across to Stirling. So when Stirling is placed under siege by the Scots, by the Bruce Scots, it is again not King Robert who is laying siege to Stirling Castle. It is his brother, Edward Bruce, Earl of Carrick, newly made Earl of Carrick, remember, who lays siege to Stirling Castle in the spring, probably sort of late March, I suppose, early April, 1314, not the king, not Bruce. Bruce again is still nowhere to be seen. Now, isn't that interesting, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls? The Bruce Scots are a hive of activity in early 1314, but it's not the king who is leading this activity. It is not, it seems, the king who is even necessarily directing this activity, as far as we can tell. It's all of these young up-and-comers. Our ambitious southern warlord, James Douglas, the king's younger brother, who has possibly just been given formal legal recognition in Parliament or by the community as a whole for his place as the king's next in line, the king's successor. And it's the king's nephew, the king's most rewarded, most beloved family member, kinsman. The man who, when Bruce does eventually die in 1329, becomes in effect regent of Scotland, the guardian on behalf of Bruce's actual successor, David II, his son. It's these men, the men who may very well shortly be competing for space in a new royal administration, who are very active in this early part of 1314, who are perhaps nailing their colours to the wall and demonstrating their importance to the royal administration, to the campaign, to get recognition for the rights of the Bruces to be kings of Scots, who are getting out there in early 1314, who are making an effort to present themselves as being of use, of importance to the cause. Perhaps because they are trying to stake their claim to prominent, privileged positions in the event that Bruce dies. Now, it is in this context, this feverish activity, organised, it seems, not by King Robert, but by his lieutenants, by his underlings, that a deal is struck between Edward Bruce, the king's younger brother, and the garrison at Stirling Castle, led by Sir Philip Mowbray, a Scot, who at this point is in the employ of the English. He has various kind of Balliol and common connections that keep him on that side for the time being, and we'll come on to more details of that further down the line. But during this period, seemingly sort of mid-May, a deal is struck between the besieging Scots, led by Edward Bruce, and the English garrison, led by Philip Mowbray. And unfortunately, the precise terms of this deal don't survive to us, but in effect, they amount to a promise on the part of the garrison that if the King of England cannot relieve Stirling Castle by St. John the Baptist's Day, the 24th of June, 1314, then the garrison will surrender the castle to the English, to the Scots, rather. The English garrison will surrender the castle to the Scots. Probably the terms of the deal state that they'll surrender the castle itself, but the garrison will be allowed to go home scot-free, as it were. Now, this deal on paper hugely benefits the English, it would seem, because remember, Edward has been promising to come north since November 1313, and he's been putting his army together since around March, April sort of time. So the garrison know that there is an English army coming north to try and relieve them anyway. And it may very well hugely encumber the Scots. Remember, the Scots have been so successful for the last 7-8 years, 7 years really, because the first year of Bruce's reign is a bit of a washout for the Bruce Scots. But Bruce has been so successful for the past 7 years by avoiding pitched battles, especially by avoiding pitched battles with this big, dangerous English royal host. Near enough the same English royal host that he spent 1310 right the way through to early 1311 avoiding. But now, because of this deal, the Scots are at least going to have to show themselves in front of Stirling Castle. They are at least going to have to be near enough to the English around that date, the 24th of June, St. John the Baptist's Day, to prove, for honour's sake, that they are at least willing to stand by their side of this deal and offer some resistance to this English attempt to relieve the castle. Thus, when Edward brings news of this deal to King Robert, according to the admittedly later Scottish poet John Barber, King Robert is furious. This is exactly what Bruce didn't want. Now that's a reasonable enough interpretation on Barber's part. It is quite possible that King Robert is, or was rather, unimpressed by the decision to make the deal with Stirling Castle. Perhaps again the deal itself was an attempt by Edward Bruce to sort of stake his claim to be the rightful King of Scots by being the King of Scots who faces and beats Edward II in battle. That's of course entirely speculative, both on my part and to some extent it seems on Barber's, because he doesn't give any indication where he gets that information from. However, by this point, by late May, it would appear that King Robert has made something of a recovery. Just like in 1308, he is getting better, it seems. And so, from now on, it would appear that the Scots are back under the control, under the direction of Robert Bruce, the big man, the king himself. And whether or not he is pleased or infuriated by the decision to make this deal with the English, it gives Bruce, this deal, about 6 weeks to get himself ready for a battle that he might not want to fight. It gives him prep time, not just to prepare himself, but to prepare his men, to put his army together, get them trained, get them ready to fight, and also to get down there on the ground where he is going to be fighting this battle, or where he is going to perhaps be trying to avoid fighting this battle, to see what the landscape's like, to see what he can do there, to see if he can turn this around to his advantage somehow. Now it is to that, Bruce's planning, Bruce's analysis of the landscape, as it were, that we are going to turn our attention to next time. In video 3, we are going to look at the landscape around Stirling Castle in 1314. We're going to look at what Bruce has to work with in terms of the physical layout of the battlefield in June 1314. So, ladies and gents, thank you very much for listening. I hope that's been interesting and informative, and I hope you'll join us for the next video. That will be next week sometime. Thank you very much, ladies and gents. Hope you enjoyed it.